Lena Sinclair was a name that turned heads wherever she went. Her beauty was undeniable, and her wealth was just as prominent. As the CEO of a thriving tech company, Lena seemed to have it all: perfectly manicured hair, flawless skin, a sharp mind, and an effortlessly fashionable wardrobe. She had built her empire from the ground up, using her intelligence and charisma to navigate a world dominated by men. But as flawless as her life seemed, there was one thing that no one could see: the secret that Lena had been hiding for months. At the age of 33, Lena found herself caught in a complicated web of emotions. Ethan, her 23-year-old assistant, had entered her life with the kind of youthful energy that Lena hadn't realized she was missing. He was eager, charming, and ambitious, a perfect fit for the role of someone who could help her navigate the growing demands of her business. But Ethan's presence in her life began to change things in ways Lena hadn't anticipated. It began innocently enough. Their professional relationship was built on respect and mutual understanding. Ethan admired Lena for her sharp mind and business acumen, while she appreciated his dedication and fresh perspective. At first, there was nothing more than a business partnership between them. They spent long hours working late together, often discussing strategies, brainstorming ideas, and solving problems that came with running a major company. But as the weeks went on, Lena found herself drawn to Ethan in a way she couldn't explain. He was different from the men she was used to. He wasn't trying to impress her with his wealth or status. Instead, he was genuinely interested in her thoughts, her ideas, and her vision for the future. Ethan was captivated by Lena's intelligence and the way she carried herself with such power. She wasn't just a beautiful woman to him. She was a force to be reckoned with. His admiration for her quickly grew into something more. Lena, on the other hand, had never known anyone quite like Ethan. He was younger, full of life, and didn't seem to care about her wealth or success. To him, Lena was just Lena, a woman who had achieved great things on her own and deserved to be admired for that. There was something refreshing about that. In a world full of people who only saw her as a businesswoman or a rich woman, Ethan saw her as something much more real. And somewhere along the way, Lena began to feel a spark that she hadn't felt in years. It started with little moments, accidental touches, lingering glances, shared laughter. Then one evening, as they worked late into the night, the tension between them reached its breaking point. In a moment of vulnerability, Lena allowed herself to be swept away by the connection they shared. She kissed Ethan, feeling the heat of desire run through her veins. It was a fleeting moment, but it changed everything. After that, their professional relationship was no longer just about business. The lines blurred. What began as a secret affair between a successful woman and a younger man quickly spiraled into something darker. Ethan became obsessed with Lena, while she found herself struggling to keep the affair hidden from the world. Despite the secrecy, the passion between them only grew stronger. Lena knew that what they had was dangerous, and yet she couldn't stop herself from getting deeper into the affair. The age gap, the power dynamics, and the risks they faced only seemed to intensify the thrill of it all. But Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She began to notice small changes in Ethan's behavior. The innocent flirtation had turned into possessiveness. Ethan started to demand more of her time, more of her attention, and more of her life. He would show up unexpectedly, send her late-night texts, and show signs of jealousy whenever Lena spoke to other men. At first, she brushed it off as a sign of affection, But as the days went on, she couldn't ignore the warning signs. Something darker was brewing inside Ethan, and Lena wasn't sure how long she could keep it all under control. As the affair continued, Lena found herself trapped. The passion and excitement were undeniable, but so were the growing fears. The price of keeping her secret was starting to feel heavier with each passing day, and she couldn't help but wonder just how far Ethan was willing to go to keep her. What had begun as a forbidden romance between a beautiful woman and a younger man was slowly morphing into something much more dangerous. And the worst part? Lena couldn't tell anyone. She couldn't tell her friends, her family, or anyone who would listen. She was on her own, caught between desire and dread, unsure of how to escape the web she had woven. As weeks passed, Lena's life began to unravel in ways she couldn't control. The affair with Ethan, once thrilling and full of excitement, had started to feel like a prison. She found herself becoming more withdrawn, constantly looking over her shoulder, afraid that someone would find out what she had been hiding. At the same time, Ethan's obsession with her had deepened, and his behavior had become increasingly erratic. What had started as a secret love affair was now a suffocating weight around her neck. Lena's closest friends began to notice that something was off. They could sense her growing distance, the way she avoided social gatherings and stopped answering calls as quickly as she once had. They didn't know the real reason behind her change in behavior, but they could tell that Lena was not herself. Carla, one of Lena's oldest friends, was particularly concerned. She had known Lena for years, and had always been there for her through thick and thin. But lately, Carla had become suspicious of Ethan's influence on Lena. She had heard rumors of the relationship, and although Lena had never confirmed them, Carla couldn't shake the feeling that something dangerous was happening. Carla had always been protective of Lena. She had watched her rise to success and had supported her through every challenge. But now she felt like Lena was slipping away into something darker. One evening, Carla confronted Lena at a dinner party. She asked her directly if there was something going on between her and Ethan, but Lena denied it, brushing it off as a misunderstanding. However, Carla wasn't convinced. She could see the guilt in Lena's eyes and the way her hands trembled when she spoke about Ethan. Carla made it clear that she was worried about Lena and her involvement with someone so much younger. Despite Carla's warnings, Lena couldn't bring herself to end the affair. She knew that Ethan's possessiveness was growing, but she also felt trapped by the feelings he stirred inside her. He had a way of making her feel wanted, desired, something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Yet there were moments when she realized just how dangerous Ethan was becoming. He started showing up at her office unannounced, and she would find messages on her phone, some of them sweet, others unsettling and full of jealousy. At first, she had dismissed it as harmless affection, but now the constant attention began to feel suffocating. Then one fateful night, everything took a turn. Carla, concerned for Lena's well-being, decided to visit her. She had heard that Ethan would be out of town for a business trip and thought it would be a good opportunity to talk some sense into her friend. When Carla arrived at Lena's home, the door was unlocked, which wasn't like Lena at all. Walking inside, Carla immediately felt something was wrong. The house was eerily quiet, and the lights were dimmed low. She called out Lena's name, but there was no response. It wasn't until Carla stepped into the garage that she found Lena's worst nightmare unfolding before her eyes. There in the corner was the lifeless body of Carla's own friend, her best friend, strangled by a piece of rope. It was a cold, calculated attack, and there were no signs of struggle. In that instant, Carla realized that Lena was entangled in something far more sinister than a mere affair. Ethan had crossed a line, and now the consequences would be far worse than she had ever imagined. Lena had been in the house all along, but she never heard Carla's approach. She was in a state of shock, frozen by the realization of what had just transpired. Ethan had killed Carla, not just because of jealousy, but because he saw her as an obstacle to his control over Lena. Lena couldn't believe it. How had things escalated so quickly? The person she thought she knew had revealed a side of himself that was utterly terrifying. Ethan had become a killer, and Lena was at the center of his madness. The police were called, and the investigation began. But Lena couldn't bring herself to go to them immediately. Fear gripped her heart as she realized the true extent of what Ethan was capable of. He had made it clear in his actions that he was willing to do whatever it took to keep her by his side. The police couldn't yet trace Ethan's involvement in Carla's death, but Lena knew in her gut that he was responsible. She felt a chill run down her spine every time she thought about him. Would he come after her next? How far would Ethan go to protect his twisted love for her? In the days that followed, Lena couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She could feel Ethan's presence everywhere she went, as if he was always a step behind her. He had already taken one life, and Lena knew there was nothing he wouldn't do to keep her in his world. The fear began to take over, and Lena was no longer sure if she could escape him. Lena couldn't escape the haunting feeling that her life was slipping out of her control. Ethan's presence seemed to linger everywhere, his voice, his texts, even his eyes, which she could feel watching her from a distance, no matter where she went. He had become her nightmare, the person she once trusted now twisted into something unrecognizable. Despite everything, Lena found herself trapped in a toxic web, unable to break free. The investigation into Carla's death was underway, but the police were having trouble connecting the dots. There were no obvious clues linking Ethan to the crime, and with Lena too frightened to come forward, the case began to stall. The more she tried to distance herself, the more Ethan seemed to tighten his grip on her. He would show up unexpectedly at her office, smiling, pretending nothing had changed. But Lena could see the darkness lurking behind his eyes. She knew deep down that he was capable of much more than just murder. Yet the worst part was that Lena could not stop herself from being drawn to him. She was suffocating in her own guilt and fear, but something in her still clung to the dangerous attraction she felt for him. Every time he spoke, every time he smiled, it was like the world outside of their twisted relationship faded away. She was trapped in an emotional prison, constantly torn between the person she wanted to be and the monster she had allowed to take over her life. Ethan, meanwhile, seemed to grow bolder with each passing day. He no longer cared about hiding his obsession. He sent her constant messages, some tender, others threatening. He would tell her how much he loved her, how they were meant to be together, and how no one could understand their bond. He would remind her of all the things he had done for her, how he had always been there for her, and how much he had sacrificed for their love. But those sweet words were always followed by something darker. The jealousy began to consume him. Every time Lena spoke to another man, even in a professional setting, he would question her motives, accusing her of abandoning him for someone else. One evening, as Lena tried to wrap up her work, she received an unexpected phone call. It was from Richard, her estranged husband. They hadn't spoken in months, but his voice on the other end of the line was calm, almost too calm. He told her he wanted to meet, to talk. There was a sudden surge of fear in Lena's chest. Richard had always been a sensitive and jealous man, and the idea of him finding out about Ethan terrified her. She knew that if Richard ever found out about the affair, it would tear their already fragile relationship apart. But at the same time, she felt a strange sense of relief that someone might finally be able to help her out of this mess. For the first time in weeks, she entertained the idea of telling someone the truth. When they met at a small cafe, Lena was anxious. Richard was distant, his eyes sharp as he watched her, sensing something was wrong. She tried to reassure him, to downplay the affair and the tension that had been building. But Richard wasn't buying it. He confronted her with questions about Ethan, about the changes he had noticed in Lena's behavior, and about how she had been avoiding him for months. In that moment, Lena realized how much she had been hiding, not just from Richard, but from everyone. But just as she was about to confess everything, Richard's demeanor shifted. He became cold, his words harsh and accusing. He told Lena that he knew she had been lying to him, and he was furious. The pain of their broken marriage had finally caught up with him, and he couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. He demanded to know everything about Ethan and what had been happening between them. Lena's mind raced, and she was about to tell him the truth when her phone buzzed. It was a message from Ethan. He had somehow found out that Lena was meeting Richard, and the message was filled with anger. "You're mine, Lena. Don't you dare forget that," it read. The words hit her like a ton of bricks. Ethan had been watching her. He had been tracking her every move, knowing that she might try to escape him. Richard saw the message on Lena's phone and immediately grew more suspicious. He demanded that Lena explain it, but before she could, something in his eyes told her that he was no longer the man she had once known. There was a coldness in his gaze, and it was clear that the meeting had spiraled out of control. He accused her of betraying him, and for the first time, Lena saw the raw fury that had been building up inside him. He was hurt, angry, and desperate for answers. But just as the confrontation was escalating, Lena received another message. This one was more chilling than the first. It was from Ethan. "I know where you are." Lena felt a cold sweat run down her back. Her heart pounded in her chest as she realized the danger she was in. She had already seen Ethan's capacity for violence, and now she was staring into the eyes of a man who was about to lose everything. Before she could even react, the cafe door slammed open. Ethan had arrived. In that moment, Lena knew there was no escaping the nightmare she had allowed to unfold. Ethan had followed her, and now there was no turning back. The moment Ethan stepped through the door, the entire atmosphere in the cafe shifted. Lena's heart seemed to stop as she saw him standing there, his eyes dark and full of rage. Richard, on the other hand, immediately stood up, his posture defensive, his eyes narrowing as he took in the sight of Ethan. There was no mistaking the tension in the air, the kind of tension that comes before something violent, something irreversible. Lena's breath hitched in her throat. Ethan's presence was like a weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She could see the anger building in him, the jealousy, the obsession, everything that had been festering inside him for weeks now exploding into the open. Richard, confused and increasingly unsettled by the scene, took a step back, clearly unsure of what was happening. You shouldn't have come here, Ethan, Lena said quietly, her voice trembling despite her attempt to sound calm. But it was too late. The moment she spoke, Ethan's eyes locked onto her, and there was nothing but a mix of betrayal and possessiveness in his gaze. You think you can just walk away from me? Ethan's voice was low, almost menacing. His words were not a question. They were a declaration. Richard, still standing, looked between the two of them. What is this? Who is this guy? He demanded, his confusion quickly turning into anger. Lena, what the hell is going on? Ethan didn't answer him. Instead, he moved closer to the table, his steps purposeful and steady. Lena instinctively stood up, trying to put some distance between them, but she could feel Ethan closing in on her. The air around them felt thick, like the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. You've made your choice, haven't you, Lena? Ethan said, his voice now sharper, tinged with a bitter edge. He didn't look at Richard, didn't acknowledge his presence at all. His eyes were locked on Lena, like she was the only thing that mattered in the world. I didn't choose anything, Lena whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of the truth. I never wanted this. I don't want any of this. She wasn't just talking about Ethan. She was talking about everything. The affair, the lies, the growing fear that had consumed her life for months. But Ethan didn't want to hear that. He was too far gone, his obsession too deep to be reasoned with. He was now beyond the point of reasoning, beyond any hope of returning to the person she had once seen in him. Richard's anger flared. I don't know what's going on here, but I'm not going to let you hurt her. He stepped toward Ethan, his fists clenched, his voice rising. You need to leave. Now. Ethan turned to face him, his eyes cold and unwavering. He was no longer the man Lena had once known, the charming assistant who had made her feel special. The man standing before her was dangerous, his face twisted with jealousy and rage, his every word a threat. Stay out of this, Richard, Ethan growled, his tone dangerous and final. This isn't your fight. Before Richard could respond, Ethan's hand shot out, grabbing him by the collar and shoving him backward. Richard stumbled but quickly regained his footing. The confrontation had escalated far beyond what Lena had imagined. She had no idea how things had gotten so out of hand, how it had come to this point. All she wanted was to leave, to escape, the nightmare that Ethan had become. But now, the nightmare was inescapable. Ethan, please, Lena said, her voice pleading. She stepped toward him, her hands shaking as she tried to reason with him. You need to leave. You're scaring me. This has gone too far. Ethan's gaze softened for a brief moment as though he were listening to her. But it didn't last long. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small knife, its blade gleaming in the dim light of the cafe. The sight of it made Lena's blood run cold. She had never seen Ethan like this, never imagined he was capable of this kind of violence. Richard saw the knife and froze, his eyes wide with disbelief. What the hell are you doing? He shouted, backing away, his hands raised in a defensive stance. Put the knife down, Ethan. This doesn't have to go any further. Richard saw the knife and froze, his eyes wide with disbelief. What the hell are you doing? He shouted, backing away, his hands raised in a defensive stance. Put the knife down, Ethan. This doesn't have to go any further. Lena's heart raced. Her mind was spinning, trying to process what was happening, but the fear was overwhelming. This wasn't just an affair gone wrong. This was something much darker. Ethan was not just obsessed. He was dangerous. "I won't let you. Take her from me," Ethan whispered, his voice shaking with the intensity of his emotion. "She's mine." Lena's world felt like it was closing in around her. She had never seen Ethan like this. He was a stranger, someone she no longer recognized. Her breath quickened as she realized just how deep the spiral had gone. In his mind, he had already lost her to Richard. He would do anything to keep her from slipping away, but just as quickly as the tension built, it snapped. There was a flash of movement, a loud noise, and then Ethan's grip on the knife loosened. Before Lena could react, Richard lunged at Ethan, tackling him to the ground, trying to wrestle the blade away from him. The cafe was filled with chaos, chairs scraping against the floor, people shouting, trying to figure out what was happening. Lena stood frozen, unable to comprehend the danger around her. In that moment, she realized the truth. Ethan had taken her life hostage, and it was only a matter of time before it all fell apart. The struggle in the cafe continued to spiral into chaos. Richard had managed to get Ethan onto the floor, but the fight wasn't over. Ethan thrashed violently, his strength fueled by rage, his eyes wild as he tried to free himself from Richard's grip. The knife was now on the ground between them, gleaming under the harsh cafe lights, a deadly reminder of just how close they had come to disaster. Lena's heart pounded in her chest as she stood frozen in place, her hands trembling. She had never imagined things would escalate so quickly. The moment she had feared, the moment she had tried to avoid, was now a horrifying reality. Ethan, once someone she had trusted and desired, had become a monster, someone capable of unspeakable violence. People in the cafe were screaming now, some running for the door, others attempting to help, but unsure of how. The scene was unfolding too quickly for anyone to process. Lena could hear the shouts, the panicked footsteps, but she couldn't move. It was like the world had slowed around her, and she was trapped in this nightmare, unable to break free. Ethan was still struggling beneath Richard, his breath coming in sharp, frantic gasps. He growled and cursed, his face contorted with fury. Richard, fueled by fear and anger, held him down, but he wasn't prepared for how vicious Ethan had become. Despite everything, Ethan's strength was unnerving. He managed to shift his weight just enough to grab the knife again. In that split second, everything seemed to slow down. Lena's mind screamed at her to act, to do something, but the fear was overwhelming. Her body was frozen, paralyzed by the sheer terror of what might happen next. Ethan, with the knife once more in his hand, had only one thing on his mind: destroying anyone who stood in his way. Just as Ethan raised the blade, aiming it at Richard, Lena finally found her voice. "No, Ethan, stop!" she shouted, her voice breaking through the panic. Her words were desperate, but they barely registered with him. He was too far gone, consumed by the belief that he had nothing left to lose. In a split-second decision, Lena's hand reached for something on the table nearby, an empty wine bottle. Without thinking, she swung it at Ethan, smashing it against his head with all the force she could muster. The impact stunned him, and he let out a strangled cry of pain, dropping the knife. For a moment, everything stood still. Ethan's eyes were glazed, his grip on reality slipping. Richard, seeing the opening, took advantage of the moment. He grabbed Ethan's wrist and twisted it, forcing him to drop the knife completely. With his free hand, Richard held Ethan down, pinning him with all his strength. The fight, the struggle, had come to an end, but Lena knew that nothing would ever be the same. Lena stood there, breathless, watching the scene unfold before her. The adrenaline was slowly wearing off, and her hands were still shaking, the weight of what had just happened crashing down on her. She had never imagined it would come to this. It had started as a simple affair, a dangerous choice she'd made for the thrill. But now it had escalated into something far beyond her control. People had been hurt, and lives had been shattered. The consequences were irrevocable. The police arrived shortly afterward, responding to the 911 calls that had flooded in when the altercation began. Officers rushed into the cafe, guns drawn, taking control of the situation. They quickly subdued Ethan, cuffing him and dragging him away, but Lena barely noticed them. Her mind was racing, and her emotions were a whirlwind of disbelief, regret, and guilt. She had been the one to invite Ethan into her life, and now everything was lost. Carla was gone. Richard was broken, and she was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered existence. As the officers took Ethan away, Lena's thoughts turned to the future. What would happen to her now? She could barely comprehend what had just happened, let alone what was to come. Ethan would face charges, of course, possibly even murder for the attack on Carla, but there was no way to undo what had already been done. Lena had no way of knowing how long she would be tied to this darkness, how long it would follow her. Richard was sitting at the table, his hands still shaking as he watched Ethan being escorted out of the cafe. He didn't look at Lena, not yet, and she knew he was processing the chaos in his own way. The silence between them was deafening. The tension that had once defined their marriage was gone, replaced with an eerie stillness. Lena didn't know what would happen next, but she knew this much. Her life would never be the same. The affair had cost her everything, her friends, her relationships, her sense of safety. And it wasn't over. Ethan's obsession wasn't just about love. It was about control, about power. As the officers closed the door behind them, Lena felt the weight of what she had lost. She had hoped at one point that love would save her. But now she understood that love could be a dangerous, destructive force when it was twisted into something unhealthy. Her life had been shattered, and she had no idea how to begin putting the pieces back together. But one thing was clear. This was only the beginning. The consequences of her choices would haunt her for the rest of her life.